there's a secret button in the top right corner.
You're saying, like, you're revealing some secret tech to everybody?
So if you click this, it unlocks the hack screen.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. It is not often that we get to complete this work, as each game that you work on takes a significant amount of time to complete. With that being said, icons and title screens are surprisingly important elements to a game. A game's icon is often the first thing viewed by a potential player when they're determining if they want to spend their valuable free time playing your game or something else. A lot of games get released every single day, and anything you can do to help distinguish your game from the crowd, or to attract more attention on app stores, helps your game perform better. Similarly, once a player has opted to click through and download your game, the title or splash screen is both the next hurdle and opportunity to capture the player's attention and sell the idea of your game. Now, I realize hurdle sounds like a strong word when you typically only need to tap the screen to continue, but every single click required from the player will guarantee to drop the conversion rate of players to play your game. It's for these reasons that a lot of effort and significance get placed on these specific elements. So, let's dive in and take a closer look at how Shay approaches these art pieces in Par for the Dungeon.
So, having done a few mobile game icons in the past, one of the most important things is readability at a small scale. You'll see even early on here, I'm actually doing a bad job of that, where I'm working pretty zoomed in. Throughout this process though, you'll see me kind of zoom in and out, putting the icons themselves on a mock-up iPhone home screen that I just found on Google Image Search, and seeing how the character or whatever we end up putting on that icon reads from a distance amongst a bunch of other icons on a preferably as busy a screen as possible. So the first few drafts here, I'm just sketching things out, different poses. There's like the usual suspects of close-up of the ball, smiling and yelling, the ball, the backpack, zooming in on that ball, the backpack, trying some different things out. I probably could have gone super in-depth with the icon exploration here. I think at the time I was already pretty set on doing something like with the backpack and the hand over the eyes looking off in the distance. I thought that captured the adventurous spirit pretty well, so I kind of just opted to not. Even though, do as I say, not as I do, I probably could have taken some more time, done different color palettes, and seen what worked well. On our previous game, Farm Punks, we probably had like 10 at least icon iterations that were all wildly different, and we actually did a bunch of A/B testing to see who had a higher click-through rate on the App Store till eventually you settle on the one that everybody liked. So then we get into the coloring of the icon. I just used one of the color palettes we had for the existing world, so World 2. Again, colors are hard to choose. If I already have a nice, pretty color palette already picked out, why bother mixing it up? Main thing, again, making sure the ball guy is readable from a distance and is the main center of attention, so he's nice and bright. And then just some foliage down beneath him. One thing that I found pretty interesting that you'll see as we get into the actual testing at scale is that the foliage really didn't read well as foliage when it's that tiny. I already had buffed it up pretty big in anticipation of the foliage not reading well from a distance, but even then, there was a lot more I could just do to beef up the scale to an unrealistic extent so it reads really well at that small zoomed out view on a phone screen. One thing I'm also constantly checking for is making sure the pose is readable. Pretty quickly I found that the big smiling grin, even though a lot of people on the team really liked it, having white on effectively also white from a distance was actually pretty tough to read, which saying all that, obviously it sounds like it would be. But in certain instances in our game, we have like other ball characters that are smiling, like the shopkeeper in the UI menu. And that's fine because there's so much detail and it's so up close that you can kind of show the nuance between the ball and the teeth. At this scale, that's not really an option. Additionally, like I was saying before, I really like that view of the ball with like his hand covering his eyes from the sun. At a distance again though, you really can't see what he's doing. The pose is pretty unclear. The eye almost kind of blends in with the hand. So I dropped it down to his side, and for the sake of clarity, it looks a lot better. And then I'll be constantly tweaking things like the darkness of the hands, the gold buckle on the strap, does that stand out from everything else? A lot of times too, just for the sake of clarity at this size, a lot of things won't have proper shadow colors on them or proper shadow placement. I'll usually usually just shade things the way that makes them stand out from one another. Like that backpack might be entirely in shadow, but I basically want the brown to stand out from everything else and not get washed away in all the green. So I'll usually do like no shadow on or really light shadow. No one's gonna be any the wiser. It just looks really good from a phone screen. So in order to replace that toothy smile as well, initially we went with like just a line, like a smirk line, which again, you could see better. Like you could tell it was a mouth from far away. Might as well have been like frowning. Is he kind of got a neutral expression? And as generic as it is to have a big smiling face or a big yelling face for your mobile icon, it does kind of just look inviting. So I was trying to play around a few things of how we can get the grin back in there while also not having to rely on doing white on white. So I did like a lined grin. And then eventually we settled on this version where the mouth is open, and then we use like the darkness of the mouth to contrast against a white tooth right in the middle, and kind of using the gap between the top of the mouth and the top of the tooth to create a fake line that really stands out from afar. And then to further sell the fact that it is his mouth, I add a little tongue in the background there as well. So this was a big one. This is the title screen or splash screen for the game, at least the first draft. I've been known to go back and do things a few times over. So I've already done a few things here initially that I would advise against doing. I kind of jumped right into 3D without thinking a lot about how I wanted it to be laid out, as well as I wasn't thinking about colors early on. I was more concerned about getting a cool, like, long distance shot, which I think I succeeded in, but I think the end result of the screen, and not to downplay my own work or anything, could have benefited from a bit more time preparing colors beforehand and making sure we had a really strong color palette. You'll see throughout this process I'm kind of jumping around colors pretty much up until the end because I didn't have a clear goal set out for myself from the get-go. So as you might have seen before, and a few times I'm doing a bigger scene like this, I started on Blender, just placed a few shapes here and there. I wanted to convey the kind of blocky individual island feel we have on all of our holes, while also making it feel like a much more grand composition. One of the difficult things about doing a piece of art for a menu like this for our game is that Par for the Dungeon is often viewed primarily or only through a top-down view. All our art is made for top-down. All the colors have been chosen for top-down to stand out from one another. So as soon as you bring that camera to the front, we have to deal with things like depth and separating the different planes, which is something I hadn't really put much thought into until now, which again, if I had done that color test beforehand, that would have been super helpful. Much like the icon, I just grabbed the World 2 color palette. You can see the ball guys making the hand over the eye gesture like it was originally planned for the icon, so I kind of brought that back in. Idea being here too, you tap the icon, the main menu screen's the same, it kind of feels like a nice continuation there, but now you get to see what he's looking out at. One of my other goals was to make sure that the splash screen didn't feel super busy. World 2 has a lot of crazy mechanics in it, got like fans, trains, spike traps, that sort of thing, but I really wanted to have something almost simple, where you just see there's a castle in the back, there's an enemy in the front, the main character's in the foreground there, and not really trying to cram in every single detail. I find oftentimes that when I try to do that, the overall composition is hurt from that, and things get pretty muddy pretty quickly because your eye is trying to jump onto every single thing here and there. So like I was saying before, one of the main issues was the color picking and getting that depth. Eventually, it just came down to the raw grunt work of getting all the layers set up, the foreground, midground, background, and then testing out colors from there. When all the grunt work is done, I start tweaking colors, and again, do as I say, not as I do. If I had a color reference from the get-go, this has been a whole lot easier, and I would have been able to just choose colors from a small little image that I had sketched out. But then I was making these massive adjustments to colors, and then I have to adjust other parts of the image to match what I adjusted there, and overall it actually slowed things down quite a bit. And no matter how well you plan, like even if I did do all that, there's always a certain amount of improv to any artistic piece of this scale. You're never really going to know what's going to look good, or you might notice something when your sketch gets converted to clean lines if that's not really working. Bits might overlap here and there. The foreground element you had planned beforehand didn't work super well. Another tough thing with our game is that there really isn't much use of shadow and directional light. Everything's kind of lit evenly from a fake top-down source. So dealing with shadows was actually pretty tricky to figure out how I wanted the ball guy to be lit, especially when your main character is like bright white. I still wanted to have like a shadow on him, but to have him stand out from the background, that actually proved pretty challenging as well. And again, my solution so far has just been to brute force it and figure it out, which I eventually did. I think at a few points here too, I went back and I readjusted some of the composition. So at a certain point, the castle itself was a lot lower. I wanted to bring it up. I also had to think about things like the positioning of the logo itself, which again, I didn't really have in the original idea. I kind of chucked it on last second. So on the fly, I had to figure out like where I wanted that castle. I wanted to be like a main focal point of the thing, but also not get in the way of the logo. Hopefully this video just kind of reveals what the behind the scenes. There really is no like right way to do it. I literally just tested stuff out until I found something I was happy with. Much like how I've done a lot of trial and error, when I have the final image ahead of me, I'll kind of sit back and look at it and see if the parts that I want the viewer to focus on are popping out as much as they should. One of the first things I realized was that the ball guy was actually being obscured by he was kind of fading into the clouds that were just above his head. So I actually moved that cliff face up a tad to make sure his body was fully behind that dark blue wall, and that really showed off his silhouette really well. Additionally, the castle, which is like the whole thing that he's looking at, was kind of blending into the sky. So I added a bunch of brightness on it, like the atmosphere and the clouds are kind of painting in this bright white color, and that really made it pop out from the background. Additionally, making those foreground elements a bit darker to draw the eye away from them and towards that castle was also a really important step there as well. Once the base image was done, I had originally set up this image to work on 16:10, 16:9, and 4:3, which are the standard mobile device scales. And so no matter which screen aspect ratio you're viewing from, all the important stuff should be still in the center. Nothing should be getting cut off. However, at the end of the process, we wanted all the planes of this to be split up, to be put into Unity. So when you moved your phone or dragged your mouse on the screen, the image would kind of move and give it a fake 3D depth. So to do that, I actually expanded the image outwards. The image was made specifically to be cut up into the different layers. So that dark foreground bit with the trees, the first platform with the ball guy, the enemy on the first platform there, platform with the trees, etc., etc. Those would be handed off to Josh and all composited in one giant sprite sheet and brought into Unity. The funny thing is this image is such a high resolution that I'm pretty sure the base file without compression was like a quarter the size of our game or half the size of our game, because 2D images are just take up so much memory space. So we compressed the hell out of it, so it should work better now. Basically using a single texture sheet there, we were able to take the different layers, put them in Unity in a 3D scene, and then layer it forward to back and give it that artificial depth that we were looking for.
Shay gave me the art, and the way I told him to give it to me was in this texture here, which doesn't look anything like his menu art, but everything, all the different pieces of it are separated out into their own section on this big image. And what I was able to do then was to cut them into 3D cards, which I can then put into all the different layers and arrange as Shay did in his artwork. Had to go through the process of placing it, looking back at his art, making sure I lined it up the right way. So it passed his test, so I think I arranged them correctly.
Success. And then what actually gives it the parallaxing when you're on the phone screen?
The parallax is just a script that I wrote. As you move the mouse around, I'll move each of those individual layers at a different rate, so it looks like fake 3D, essentially. So if I just move my mouse around here, it gives it that added depth. And you can also see that the same wind shader that you might have seen us talk about a little bit in our last episode, I actually applied to the cards as well, because they're 3D objects. So you could see these foreground trees gently swaying in the wind.
Damn.
As well.
Hope somebody notices.
Yeah, I hope somebody notices the trees. You have to kind of stay on the menu a little bit and look at them to notice it, but it's there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, Shay mentioned that on past projects, we have A/B tested our icons. The same will hold true for Par for the Dungeon once we get the game closer to being finalized. Icons have the ability to skew download rates dramatically, so making sure you have the right icon to represent your game and genre are critical. While it was skimmed over in the video, The ability to create large scenes like the title screen require a certain eye for how best to capture the player's imagination and sell the tone of the game. As stated previously, these two elements dramatically change the click-through rate of new players into your game and can help give you that initial kickstart before reviews or other information begins to appear to shape players' opinions of your game. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. If you haven't subscribed already, it truly helps grow this channel and will hopefully allow us to continue building this content long into the future. We certainly enjoy being able to share the process as often as we can here on YouTube. Thanks as always, and catch you in the next one.